The night she was taken, no one dared to say goodbye. Not because they didn't care, but because they knew she was never coming back. Dragged from her home under the cold command of warriors, Ilara didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. Because deep down, she understood the truth. This wasn't a journey. This was a transaction, a deal sealed in silence, where she was the price, sent as a gift to the most feared alpha in the region, a man known for his ruthless rule, his cold heart, and the powerful Luna who already stood by his side. To them, she was nothing, not a mate, not a bride, not even a person, just a concubine, a distraction, a shadow meant to exist quietly and disappear even faster. But the moment the palace gates closed behind her, something shifted. The air grew heavy, the Alpha's wolf stirred, and a bond, long buried beneath something dark and ancient, began to awaken. Because what they didn't know, what no one knew, was that the girl they had just delivered in chains was never meant to kneel. She was never meant to serve. And she was definitely never meant to be ignored. She was the one fate had hidden, the one destiny had protected, the one truth no one was ready for, the Alpha's real mate. And when that truth rises, it won't just break hearts. It will burn the entire kingdom to the ground. Chapter 1. The moment she stepped into the palace, Ilara knew she didn't belong there. Not because of the towering silver walls, not because of the guards watching her every move, but because of the silence. A heavy, judging silence. The kind that wraps around you like chains tight, suffocating, unwelcoming. And then came the whispers. Is that her? The one they sent? She's underwhelming. A concubine? She doesn't even look worthy. Ilara kept walking, step by step, slow, steady, controlled, even as every word sliced through her like a blade. Because if there was one thing she refused to do, it was break in front of them. But what no one noticed was the way the air shifted the second she crossed the palace gates, as if something ancient had just awakened. The grand doors opened with a deep echo, and there he was, Alpha Kyle, seated like a king born from shadows. Power radiated from him without effort, cold, commanding, absolute. His sharp eyes lifted, resting on her for the briefest moment. Just one glance. Then he looked away, like she was nothing, like she didn't matter. And somehow, that hurt more than the whispers. Step forward. The voice didn't belong to him. It was softer, smoother, but far more dangerous. Ilara turned and saw her, Luna Seraphine, draped in elegance, wrapped in authority. Every inch of her screamed power and possession. She walked closer, circling Ilara slowly, like a queen inspecting something beneath her. So, Seraphine said, her lips curving faintly, this is what they sent us. Her eyes scanned Ilara from head to toe. Disapproval, amusement, contempt. All this for a girl like you? A few people chuckled quietly. Ilara said nothing. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was control. But Seraphine wasn't done. And what she said next would define Ilara's place in the palace. You should understand something very clearly, Seraphine continued, her voice dropping just enough to carry authority. You are not a guest here. A pause. You are not even competition. Another step closer. You are here to serve. Her eyes hardened. To exist where I allow you to exist. The message was clear. You are nothing. Still, Ilara didn't bow. She lowered her gaze, but not in submission, in restraint, because something deep inside her was resisting. From across the hall, Alpha Kale watched, silent, unmoving, uninterested, or so it seemed. But his wolf stirred, restless, agitated, for reasons he couldn't explain. You will be taken to the lower quarters, Seraphine ordered, turning away as if Ilara had already been dismissed. Keep her out of sight. The guards moved immediately, hands gripping Ilara's arms. Not gently, never gently. As they dragged her away, the whispers followed again. Louder this time, sharper, crueler. But just before she disappeared through the corridor, something happened. Something small. Something no one else noticed. Alpha Kale's gaze shifted, just slightly, back to her. And for the first time, his wolf didn't stay silent. A low growl echoed in his chest. Confusing, unwelcome, unfamiliar. Because it wasn't anger. It wasn't threat. It was recognition. Kael's jaw tightened. His eyes darkened. And yet, he said nothing, did nothing, watched her leave, like she meant nothing. But somewhere deep beneath the silence, something had already begun. In the lower quarters, the door slammed shut behind Ilara. Dark, cold, isolated. A room meant for servants or prisoners. She stood there for a long moment, alone. Finally, she exhaled, not in fear, not in sadness, but in quiet understanding. They think I'm nothing, she whispered softly. Her fingers curled slightly at her sides. A strange warmth flickered beneath her skin. Unfamiliar, unexplained, uncontrollable. But if the palace believed she would disappear quietly, they had just made their first mistake. Because the girl they locked away in the shadows was the one who would soon stand at the center of it all. And when that moment came, no one would be able to ignore her again. Chapter 2. The entire palace moved with a sense of purpose the next morning, as if the walls themselves understood that something important was about to happen. Servants hurried through the corridors, carrying silks, polished silver trays, and ceremonial oils. Guards stood straighter than usual, their expressions hardened with duty. Even the elders had arrived, their presence alone enough to command silence wherever they passed. Tonight was not an ordinary night. Tonight, Alpha Kale would strengthen his bond with Luna Seraphine before the eyes of the entire pack. It was meant to be a moment of power, unity, and certainty. A declaration that the Alpha had chosen his Luna, and that nothing would challenge that choice. And yet, something already felt wrong. Kael stood alone in his chamber, staring at his reflection without truly seeing it. His expression was calm, unreadable to anyone who might have walked in. But inside him, there was unrest. A quiet tension sat beneath his skin, like a storm waiting for the right moment to break. He adjusted the cuffs of his ceremonial attire slowly, deliberately, as if the simple act could steady the unease building in his chest. This was what he had decided, what he had agreed to. Seraphine was powerful, strategic, respected. Their union would strengthen alliances, stabilize the pack, and silence any opposition. It was the right choice, the logical choice. So why did it feel so hollow? A low growl stirred within him. Kale froze. It wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, but it was there, clear, undeniable. His wolf, restless, unsettled, rejecting. Kyle's jaw tightened slightly as he exhaled through his nose, trying to push the feeling aside. Not now, he muttered under his breath, his voice low and controlled. This is not the time. But his wolf didn't listen. The unease deepened. A sharp, invisible resistance coiled inside him, as though every instinct he possessed was pulling him away from something he was supposed to accept, or toward something he was trying to ignore. Outside, the palace courtyard had been transformed into a breathtaking ceremonial ground. Torches lit the stone pathways with golden flames, their light flickering against banners that carried the Alpha's crest. The pack gathered in silence, their eyes fixed on the raised platform where the ritual would take place. This was tradition. This was law, and no one dared question it. At the center of it all stood Seraphine. She was flawless. Dressed in flowing white and silver, her beauty was almost untouchable. Every movement she made was graceful, calculated, perfect. She didn't look nervous. She didn't look uncertain. She looked like a woman who already knew the outcome and had no doubt it would go her way. Because as far as she was concerned, it already had. Her gaze swept across the crowd, confident and composed, until it briefly flickered toward the far edge of the courtyard, toward the shadows, where someone else stood, unnoticed, unimportant. Ilara. She had been ordered to stay out of sight, to remain where she wouldn't disturb the ceremony. And yet, there she was, standing just beyond the torchlight, half hidden in darkness, watching, silent, still. She didn't belong here. And somehow, that made it impossible to look away. Kael stepped into the courtyard moments later, and the entire atmosphere shifted. Conversations died instantly. Heads bowed. The air itself seemed to tighten around his presence. He walked forward with steady confidence, every step measured, every movement controlled. To everyone watching, he looked exactly as he should, powerful, certain, unshaken. But inside him, the storm had only grown louder. His wolf was pacing now, restless, agitated, refusing to settle. Kael's gaze lifted and landed on Seraphine. She smiled, perfect, expectant, waiting. This was what he had chosen. So why did his instincts feel like they were screaming at him to stop? The ceremony began with the elders stepping forward, their voices rising in ancient chants that echoed through the courtyard. The words were old, filled with meaning and tradition, binding Alpha and Luna together under the laws of their kind. It was a sacred ritual, unbreakable. Kael listened, but not fully, because something else had already stolen his focus. A scent, faint, familiar, impossible to ignore. His body tensed. Slowly, almost unwillingly, his gaze shifted, past the torches, past the gathered crowd, toward the shadows, toward her, Ilara. And the moment his eyes found her, everything inside him reacted. His wolf surged forward violently, no longer content to stay silent. A deep, warning growl rumbled through his chest, sharp enough that Kael had to clench his fists to keep control. His breathing shifted, uneven for just a second, before he forced it back into rhythm. This wasn't right. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was standing beside his chosen Luna. So why did it feel like the bond was somewhere else? Alpha, one of the elders prompted gently, breaking through his thoughts. It is time. Kael blinked once, the moment snapping back into place. He turned back to Seraphine. She was watching him now not just with confidence, but with something sharper beneath it. Suspicion, she had noticed. Maybe not everything, but enough. Cale extended his hand toward her. This was the moment. The final step. All he had to do was take it. Seraphine placed her hand in his. Warm, steady, certain. But the second their skin touched, pain shot through him. Sudden, sharp, wrong. Cale's entire body stiffened. His wolf roared, not in acceptance, not in connection, but in rejection. A flicker of confusion crossed his face before he could stop it. The bond wasn't forming. It was resisting, fighting, breaking before it could even begin. Seraphine's grip tightened slightly, her smile faltering for just a fraction of a second. "Cale," she whispered under her breath, low enough that only he could hear. "Focus." But it wasn't that simple, because no matter how hard he tried, something inside him refused. His eyes moved again, drawn, pulled, uncontrolled, back to the shadows, back to her. Ilara stood frozen where she was, her heart pounding in a way she didn't understand. The moment Cale looked at her, a strange warmth spread through her chest, deep and unfamiliar. It wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It was something else. Something that felt like recognition. And in that moment, the truth tried to surface. Kyle inhaled sharply, breaking the contact as if burned. He stepped back just one step, but it was enough to send a ripple through the entire ceremony. The elders fell silent. The crowd shifted uneasily. Even the torches seemed to flicker harder, as if reacting to the sudden change. This had never happened before. Not in any ceremony. Not in any bond. Kyle started. But the words didn't come, because there was no explanation he could give. Not one that made sense. Seraphine's expression hardened, the mask of perfection cracking just enough to reveal the anger beneath. She turned slightly toward the elders, forcing a composed smile back onto her face. "It is nothing," she said smoothly. "The Alpha is simply overwhelmed. We will continue." But Kyle didn't move, didn't speak, didn't agree. Because deep inside him, he already knew. This wasn't just doubt. This wasn't just hesitation. This was his very nature, rejecting the bond. And if his wolf refused to accept the Luna standing beside him, then the real question was no longer what was wrong, but who it was trying to find instead. Chapter 3. By the third day, the palace had already decided who Ilara was, and more importantly, who she would never be. The servants stopped pretending to be polite. The guards no longer hid their contempt. Even the air around her felt heavier, as if the walls themselves rejected her presence. Every step she took through the lower corridors came with whispers that followed closely behind, sharp and deliberate. Concubine. Gift. Nothing. It was no longer said quietly. It was meant for her to hear. And she did. Every word, every tone, every intention behind them. But she didn't react. She didn't argue. She didn't break. The room she had been given remained just as cold as the first night. No warmth, no comfort, a small bed, a narrow window, and silence that stretched longer than the hours themselves. It was a place meant to shrink a person, to remind them of their place. But Ilara refused to shrink. Instead, she adapted. She woke early, before the others stirred. She moved quietly, learning the paths of the palace, understanding where she could walk without being stopped, where she could exist without being noticed. Because in a place where she was meant to disappear, she chose to observe, to learn, to endure. The first time Luna Seraphine came to see her, it wasn't announced. Ilara was kneeling beside a basin of water, her hands submerged as she cleaned a set of ceremonial cloths she had been ordered to wash. The task was unnecessary. Servants existed for such duties, but the message behind it was clear. You are beneath them. You will act like it. The door opened without warning. Ilara didn't look up immediately, but she felt it. That presence. Cold, controlled, watching. You're adjusting faster than I expected. The voice was smooth, almost pleasant. Almost. Ilara slowly lifted her gaze. Seraphine stood at the entrance, her posture flawless as always, her expression calm, but her eyes held something sharper, something observant, something calculating. I gave you tasks meant to exhaust you, Seraphine continued, stepping into the room. Yet here you are, still standing, still quiet. She circled slowly, her movements graceful, deliberate. Most girls in your position would have cried by now. She stopped just behind Ilara, or begged to be sent away. Ilara rose carefully to her feet, her movements respectful but not submissive. I was not sent here to cry, she replied softly. Her voice was calm, steady, and that was the problem, because Seraphine wasn't looking for obedience. She was looking for weakness. A faint smile touched Seraphine's lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. No, she said quietly. You were sent here to be useful. Her gaze hardened slightly. And I'm beginning to wonder if you understand what that means. Silence settled between them, heavy, tense. But Ilara didn't lower her eyes this time. She held her ground, not in defiance, but in quiet strength. Seraphine stepped closer, too close. Her voice dropped, softer now, but far more dangerous. You should be careful, she murmured. Strength in the wrong place can be mistaken for arrogance. Her gaze searched Ilara's face, as if waiting, hoping for a reaction. Fear, anger, anything. But Ilara gave her nothing. I know my place, Ilara said simply. Seraphine tilted her head slightly, studying, measuring, uncertain, because something about that answer didn't sit right. And, for the first time, the Luna realized something unsettling. This girl wasn't broken, not even close. Seraphine stepped back slowly, her expression smoothing once more into something composed, something unreadable. Good, she said lightly. Then stay in it. And with that, she turned and left. But the tension she carried with her didn't leave the room. Later that evening, Ilara found herself drawn to the courtyard, not by curiosity, not by intention, but by something she couldn't explain. The night air was cool, the moon hanging high above, casting a pale glow across the stone ground. It was quiet here, peaceful, a rare moment where the weight of the palace didn't press so heavily against her. She exhaled slowly, lifting her gaze to the sky. For the first time since arriving, she allowed herself to breathe. You shouldn't be here. The voice came from behind her, low, firm, familiar. Ilara didn't turn immediately. She already knew who it was. Alpha Kale. Slowly, she faced him. He stood a few steps away, his presence filling the space effortlessly. Even in silence, he commanded attention, authority, power. But tonight, there was something else, something quieter, something uncertain. I wasn't aware the courtyard was forbidden, Elara replied calmly. Kale studied her, really studied her this time, not as a passing glance, not as an afterthought, but as if trying to understand something that didn't make sense. You have a habit of being where you shouldn't be, he said. Elara's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but close. And you have a habit of noticing. The words hung in the air between them, unexpected, unplanned, dangerous, because this wasn't how this was supposed to go. Kale stepped closer, his gaze narrowing slightly. You speak boldly, for someone in your position, and you listen, more than you admit, she replied. Silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It was charged, alive. For a brief moment, neither of them looked away, and something passed between them, unspoken, unclear, but undeniable. Then, Kale's expression hardened slightly, as if remembering himself. This place will destroy you if you're not careful, he said. Elara held his gaze. Then it will have to try harder. Another pause, another shift, and in that moment, something inside the alpha changed. Because the girl everyone dismissed, the girl meant to disappear, was the only one who didn't fear him, didn't chase him, didn't need him. And without realizing it, that was exactly what drew him closer. As Elara turned and walked away, her steps steady, her head held high, Kale remained where he stood watching her go. Not as a ruler observing a subject, not as an alpha judging a concubine, but as a man, beginning to feel something he could no longer ignore, something unexpected, something dangerous, something that felt like the beginning of a bond he had never chosen, but might not be able to resist. Chapter 4. It began with something so small, it could have been ignored. A fleeting sensation, a strange warmth, a pull that made no sense. At first, Elara thought it was just exhaustion, the long days, the constant tension, the weight of being unwanted. It was enough to make anyone feel unsteady. But this was different. This wasn't weakness. It felt alive, like something inside her was waking up. The first time it happened, she was carrying a tray through the upper corridor, a place she was not meant to be, but had been ordered to pass through quickly and without drawing attention. Her steps were careful, measured, silent, until suddenly her breath caught. Her fingers tightened around the tray as a sharp wave of heat rushed through her chest, spreading outward like fire beneath her skin. It wasn't painful, not exactly, but it was overwhelming, unfamiliar. Wrong. She stopped, just for a second, but it was enough. The tray slipped slightly, the metal rattling softly in her grip. Elara, her name, spoken behind her. She froze, because she knew that voice. Slowly, she turned. Alpha Kale stood at the end of the corridor, his gaze locked onto her with an intensity that made her pulse stutter. He hadn't called her name before, not once, but now it sounded different, lower, rougher, like it had been pulled from somewhere deeper than intention. And the moment their eyes met, the strange feeling inside her intensified. Her heartbeat quickened, not from fear, not from panic, but from something she couldn't explain, something that felt like recognition without memory. Kale stepped closer, slowly, carefully. as if approaching something unpredictable. "Why are you here?" he asked. His tone controlled, but there was tension beneath it now. Something unsteady. "I was ordered to pass through," Ilara replied, her voice quieter than usual. Not out of fear, but because her body was still reacting to his presence in a way she couldn't control. The closer he came, the stronger it became. That pull, that heat, that strange, invisible connection tightening between them. Kyle stopped a few steps away. Too close. And yet, not close enough. His gaze dropped briefly to her hands, still gripping the tray too tightly before returning to her face. "You're shaking," he said. Ilara exhaled slowly, forcing her fingers to relax. "I'm fine." But she wasn't. And something told him that. Because his wolf was reacting again. Not with anger, not with rejection, but with something far more dangerous. Recognition. Claim. Kyle's jaw tightened as he took a step back, as if creating distance could silence the reaction building inside him. But it didn't. If anything, it made it worse. "You should go," he said suddenly, his voice sharper now. Not cold, not indifferent, but strained. Ilara didn't argue, didn't question. She simply nodded once and walked past him. But as she did, their shoulders brushed, and everything changed. The contact was brief, barely there, but it sent a jolt through both of them. Ilara gasped softly, her steps faltering as a flood of unfamiliar sensations rushed through her mind. Images, emotions, fragments she couldn't fully grasp. A forest, moonlight, a voice calling her name. Not Ilara. Something else. Something she couldn't remember. Cal froze where he stood, his entire body locked, because that single touch had done what nothing else could. It had shaken his control. Completely. "What was that?" Ilara whispered, more to herself than to him. But Kyle didn't answer, because he didn't know. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Not for either of them. Ilara lay on her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling as the strange sensations continued to flicker beneath her skin. Every time she closed her eyes, the fragments returned brief flashes of something just out of reach. A memory, or something pretending to be one. Her chest tightened as she pressed a hand against it, trying to steady the rhythm of her heart. "Why does it feel like I'm forgetting something important?" she whispered into the darkness. Across the palace, Kyle stood at the window of his chamber, his gaze fixed on the moon. His wolf was restless. More than ever. Pacing, growling, demanding. And every instinct inside him was pointing to one truth he wasn't ready to accept. Meanwhile, in a quiet, hidden part of the palace, someone else had noticed. The old healer. Ilara didn't know why she went to her. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was desperation. Or maybe something was guiding her. The healer's chamber smelled of herbs and thyme, the air thick with a presence that felt older than the palace itself. The woman inside looked up the moment Ilara stepped in, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly. "You shouldn't be here," the healer said. Ilara hesitated. "I didn't know where else to go." The healer studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, she stepped closer. "Come here." Ilara obeyed. Not because she trusted her, but because something inside her said she should. The healer reached out, taking Ilara's wrist gently. And the moment she did, her entire expression changed. Her eyes widened, her grip tightened, her breath caught, as if she had just touched something impossible. This the healer whispered, her voice unsteady for the first time. "This can't be." Hilara's heart began to race again. "What is it?" The healer looked up at her slowly, really looked at her, not as a concubine, not as a servant, but as something else entirely. "You," she said quietly, "are not what you appear to be." Ilara's breath hitched. "What does that mean?" The healer's voice dropped, almost to a whisper, as if something or someone tried to hide you. A chill ran down Ilara's spine. "Your scent," the healer continued, her brows furrowing deeply. "It's wrong, faint, suppressed." Her eyes darkened, blocked. Ilara shook her head slightly, confusion building. "I don't understand." "It's a curse," the healer said suddenly. Silence filled the room, heavy, unavoidable. "A powerful one," she added. "Old magic, the kind used to conceal, to erase, to protect." Ilara's voice barely came out. "Protect what?" The healer hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. "Not what?" she said slowly. "Who?" Ilara's heart pounded. Her mind raced. Her past, her identity, everything she thought she knew, suddenly felt uncertain. Because if something had been powerful enough to hide who she truly was, then the question was no longer why she felt different. But what had the world been trying to keep hidden all along? Chapter 5. The palace had never felt this tense before. Not during war. Not during council disputes. Not even during the first failed ceremony. But tonight, something was different. This wasn't just a ritual anymore. This was a test. Word had spread quickly after the first attempt. The Alpha had hesitated. The Bond had resisted. And though the elders had dismissed it as temporary imbalance, no one truly believed that explanation. Because wolves didn't hesitate, and bonds didn't fail. So tonight, everything had to go perfectly. There would be no mistakes, no interruptions, no excuses. The ceremonial grounds were brighter than before, torches burning higher, guards doubled, elders positioned in a full circle around the sacred platform. The entire pack had gathered again, but this time there was no excitement, only anticipation and unease. At the center stood Luna Seraphine, more radiant than ever, more composed than ever. But beneath the perfection, there was something else, something sharp, something desperate, because this time, failure was not an option. Alpha Kyle arrived moments later, his presence commanding silence the instant he stepped forward. His expression was calm, unreadable, but his eyes held something darker now, something heavier. The events of the past days had not left him untouched. If anything, they had made everything worse. His wolf was no longer just restless. It was fighting him. Every instinct inside him resisted what he was about to do. And yet, he stepped forward anyway, because this was his duty, his choice, his decision. But deep down, something inside him was already breaking. From the edge of the crowd, hidden once again in shadow, Ilara stood watching. She hadn't meant to come. She hadn't wanted to be here. But something had pulled her. Something stronger than reason. Stronger than fear. Her chest tightened as she looked at the platform. At Kale. At Seraphine. At the bond that was about to be sealed. And something inside her whispered, "This is wrong." The ceremony began. The elders' voices rose once more, ancient and powerful, weaving words that had bound alphas and lunas for generations. The air grew thick with energy, the ground beneath them almost humming with it. Everything was in place. Everything was ready. Kael turned to Seraphine. She met his gaze without hesitation, her expression steady, her hand already reaching for his. Confident, certain. Begin, one of the elders commanded. Kael took a breath, then reached for her. The moment their hands touched, the world seemed to hold its breath. For a second, nothing happened. Then, pain exploded through him. Kael's body locked as a violent force surged through his veins, sharp and unforgiving. It wasn't hesitation this time. It wasn't doubt. It was rejection. Pure, absolute, unmistakable. His wolf roared, loud enough that the sound echoed through the entire courtyard. A sound filled with resistance, with fury, with refusal. Gasps broke out across the crowd. The elders faltered. The energy around the ritual began to destabilize. Seraphine's grip tightened painfully around his hand. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling despite her effort to remain composed. "No, this is not happening." But it was. Kael staggered slightly, his control slipping as the bond attempted to form and failed. Again. But this time, it didn't just fail. It shattered. And when it broke, it didn't do so quietly. A surge of energy burst outward from the platform, forcing everyone back as the ritual circle fractured. The sacred flames flickered wildly, some extinguishing completely, others burning out of control. The elders shouted in alarm, "This is impossible. The bond is rejecting." Seraphine's composure finally cracked. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face as she looked at Kael. "You're resisting it!" she accused, her voice rising. "You're doing this!" Kael barely heard her, because his attention had already shifted. Pulled, dragged, toward her. Ilara, standing at the edge of the crowd, frozen. And in that moment, everything became clear. The pain in his chest, the unrest in his wolf, the pull he couldn't explain. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't doubt. It was misdirection. Because the bond had never been wrong. It had just been misplaced. Kael's breathing grew heavier as his eyes locked onto Ilara. Something primal taking over. Something deeper than thought, deeper than logic. Recognition, claim, truth. Ilara. Her name left his lips before he could stop it. The entire crowd fell silent, because this time, everyone heard it. Ilara's heart slammed against her chest as all eyes turned toward her. The weight of their attention was suffocating, but it wasn't what made her freeze. It was him, the way he was looking at her, not with indifference, not with distance, but with something that shook her to her core. "Come here," Kael said. The command wasn't loud, but it carried. Powerful, unavoidable. Ilara didn't move. Not immediately, because nothing made sense. Not the ceremony, not the bond, not the way her entire body was reacting to his voice. She started, her voice unsteady. But before she could say anything, Seraphine stepped forward. "No." Her voice cut through the air like a blade. Sharp, furious, unyielding. "This ends now," she said, her gaze burning as she turned to Kael. "You will finish what you started." But Kael didn't look at her, didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge her presence. Because for the first time, he couldn't. Everything inside him was focused on one truth, and it stood right in front of him. The bond hadn't broken because it was weak. It had broken because it was wrong. And now, with the entire pack watching, with the truth beginning to surface, with the past refusing to stay buried, only one question remained. If she wasn't just a concubine, then who? Was she really? Chapter 6. Silence fell over the courtyard like a storm that refused to break. No one moved. No one spoke. The sacred flame still flickered wildly from the shattered bond, casting shadows that danced across stunned faces. The elders stood frozen, their chants long forgotten. The guards didn't know whether to step forward or stand down, because something had just happened that should never happen. A bond had not only failed, it had chosen someone else. And all eyes were now on her, Ilara, the concubine. She stood at the edge of the crowd, her chest rising and falling unevenly, her heart pounding so loudly it felt like the entire courtyard could hear it. The weight of their stares pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. But it wasn't their gaze that held her in place. It was his, Alpha Kyle. He was no longer looking at her like a stranger, no longer like a ruler observing someone beneath him. Now, he looked at her like a man who had just found something he didn't realize he had been searching for. Ilara. Her name left his lips again, stronger this time, clearer, certain. And this time, it didn't feel like a call. It felt like a claim. Something inside her responded instantly. A sharp pull deep within her chest, stronger than anything she had felt before. It spread through her body like wildfire, awakening something buried, something hidden, something that had been waiting. Her breath caught, her vision blurred for a moment. And then, pain. Ilara gasped softly as she stumbled, her hand flying to her chest as a burning sensation erupted beneath her skin. It wasn't like before. This wasn't warmth. This was something breaking. Across the courtyard, the old healer stepped forward suddenly, her voice cutting through the silence. It's happening. The elders turned sharply toward her. What is? One of them demanded. But the healer didn't look at them. Her eyes were locked on Ilara, filled with realization, with certainty. The curse, she said. A ripple of confusion spread through the crowd. But Kale didn't look away, didn't question, because something inside him already knew. Ilara dropped to her knees as the pain intensified, her breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts. Her fingers curled into the fabric of her dress as the sensation spread, unraveling something deep within her. It felt like chains snapping, like something that had held her together was finally breaking apart. What's happening to me? She whispered, her voice trembling despite her effort to stay steady. The healer moved closer, her voice firm now. Don't fight it. Ilara's eyes widened. I'm not. You are, the healer cut in gently but firmly. You've been fighting it your whole life without even knowing. The pain surged again, stronger, deeper. And then the memories came. Not slowly, not gently, but all at once. Flashes of a past she didn't remember. A forest bathed in moonlight. A child running barefoot, laughter echoing through the trees. A voice calling her name. Not Ilara. Something older. Something truer. A woman kneeling before her, tears in her eyes. Forgive me, the woman whispered. This is the only way to protect you. A surge of power. A whisper of ancient words. A binding spell. Ilara gasped as her eyes snapped open, her entire body trembling. I remember. The courtyard held its breath. I remember everything. Kyle took a step forward, his voice low, steady, but filled with something raw. Then tell me. Ilara lifted her gaze to meet his. And, for the first time, there was no confusion in her eyes, no uncertainty, only truth. I was hidden, she said softly. My scent, my identity, everything was sealed away. Her voice grew stronger with each word. To protect me. From what? One of the elders demanded. Ilara's gaze didn't leave Kyle's. From being found too soon. A heavy silence followed, because now everything was starting to make sense. The failed bond, the restless wolf, the pull that refused to be ignored. It was never broken. It was simply waiting. Kale stepped closer, his movements slow, deliberate, as if approaching something sacred. Waiting for you, he said. The words settled between them, unshakable, unavoidable. Behind them, Seraphine's voice broke through the silence. No, it wasn't loud, but it was sharp, shaking. This is a lie, she said, stepping forward, her composure finally crumbling. A trick, some kind of manipulation. It isn't, the healer interrupted calmly. All eyes turned to her. The curse was real, she continued. Old magic, designed to suppress a true mate bond until the right moment. Her gaze hardened slightly. And that moment is now. Seraphine's hands trembled at her sides. No, she whispered again, but this time there was no power behind it, only fear, because deep down she knew. Kyle turned fully toward Ilara now, standing just a step away from her, close enough to feel the connection between them. Strong, undeniable. You were never meant to stand in the shadows, he said quietly. Ilara held his gaze. And you were never meant to choose wrong. A faint breath of something almost like a smile touched his lips. Then he extended his hand, not as a command, not as an order, but as a choice. The entire pack watched, waiting, holding their breath, because this moment would decide everything. Ilara looked at his hand, then back at him, at the alpha who had ignored her, dismissed her, failed to see her, and yet was the one her soul had been tied to all along. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, everything changed. A surge of energy unlike anything before flowed between them, powerful and pure. The sacred flames steadied instantly, burning brighter, stronger, as if recognizing the truth that had finally been revealed. The air shifted. The bond formed. Seamless. Unbreakable. Real. Kale inhaled sharply, his eyes darkening as his wolf finally settled, not in resistance, not in confusion, but in complete, undeniable acceptance. Ilara, he whispered. But this time, her name felt different, because she wasn't just Ilara anymore. She was the one the bond had chosen, the one fate had hidden, the one power itself had protected. She was no longer the unwanted concubine, no longer the forgotten girl in the shadows. She was the truth they tried to bury, and now she had risen as the Alpha's true mate, the pack's rightful Luna, and the most powerful woman they had never seen coming. But as the bond sealed and the flames burned brighter, one thing remained certain. Power like hers would not rise quietly, and those who lost everything tonight would not accept it without a fight.